Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. We all strive for a life of purpose, meaning, connectedness, and love, sans violence. Today's discussion will focus on a plethora of areas that are of pivotal importance for all of us to understand and comprehend. I'm so pleased to welcome to the studio Hans Bilimoria from the Grassrooted Trust. He's an advocate in sexual and reproductive health and education. Good evening and welcome, Hans.
Good evening.
Hans, my first question to you, I'd like to talk about the importance of demystifying masculinity. This debate of raising healthy boys as opposed to mending broken men. Speak to us about how we can overcome the harmful effects of patriarchal norms which have dictated and set out that men need to be aggressive and hard and heterosexual and exude sexual dominance. Speak to us about how dangerous this is for society.
I think it is apparent how dangerous it is. I think if you take a look at statistics around violence globally, statistics around violence in Sri Lanka, it is very apparent if you bring up boys and men to feel entitled, if you bring up boys and men to think that they have impunity from certain actions, and if that is the landscape that there is, if that is the key messaging from families, if that is the key messaging from schools, then what do you expect? You can't expect any different. So it is incredibly troubling that these patriarchal notions, as per this patriarchal construct, if you like, which we have built, and we've had help build. Globally, it's a global construct. Sri Lanka is, we are human beings, so we have it too. So this construct, how do we help our people find the way through? Then we have to make substantive changes. And part of those substantive changes are, okay, how do we talk about boys and girls, for example, at home?
Right.
What are those conversations that we have? See, if you want to talk about big things like sexism or big things like racism, fascism, where are the roots of those? Where do the roots of those come from? It's conversations that we sit and we listen to, right? So we sit, I was brought up in a house with a veranda. You sit on the veranda and you'd listen to your parents, you'd listen to their friends, you'd listen to your grandparents. Conversations, perhaps less so now, but conversations is what builds our approach, our psyche, our Weltanschauung, our approach to life. So where are we learning? Most of this we learn from home. What are the spaces that we inhabit? This is where we are learning this. So unless we learn differently, and learned behavior is a reality, kids look at us. My daughter looks at me and learns from me. My daughter looks at her mother and models herself on her mother because she's a girl and that is the model, right? So these are known psychological, they're not concepts, that's just facts now. So those are facts, that's the science. So now if that is the case, then imagine the responsibility upon us to make sure that right from the beginning, we let our children know that being good human beings and valuing each other as human beings, regardless of what is between your legs, is where we start, right? So that's where I would begin. And if you take a look at, now we do workshops, right? And we work with adults. So we have to find different strategies and mechanisms, if you like, to engage with them and try and challenge these ideas. And one of the most effective that we've developed is let's say we have a workshop and we break up a group into 4 groups, right? So men and women in each group, let's say 5 in each group. So 20 people in a workshop. And then we go to one group and say, okay, the baby is just born. This is the girl child, this is the boy. 10 things you'd buy. Right? Next group. The kids are 6. 10 things you'd buy for a 6-year-old. The kids are 12. 10 things you'd buy, right? And then you go to the other ones and say 18, 10 pieces of advice, right? And then you see the progression. So when you go to the 0, you'd see that most of the stuff is pretty much the same, but there's a color bifurcation of pink and blue. And then that gives us the opportunity to unpack that for them.
Right.
And let people know that, for example, pink and blue, post-World War I, pink was the color for boys because pink was a reflection of red, which was a very masculine color. Purple was the color of the church, very masculine color. So a dark pink for the boys was the initial bifurcation,
right,
and a nice light, gentle blue for the girls, right? That's where it started. And you can Google this stuff. On Smithsonian has a wonderful article, right?
Okay.
So that's where it started,
Right.
to sell stuff to parents. So then around the same time, you had the suffragette movement, you had this strive for equality, and you had the appropriation of these masculine colors by women. The reds and the pinks and the purples were appropriated. We're equal, right? And then that led to a switch which you see by the end of the Second World War, where you have this pink and blue now, where sometimes people give me pseudoscience to prove that pink is a color that girls like, based on experience. Now my daughter is 5, and guess her favorite colors? Pink and purple. And she loves dressing up and all that. And we've not challenged that in any way. But we did watch it. And we were wondering, where did this come from? It actually, suddenly I was like, is this pseudoscience, or am I seeing this in front of me? What's going on? And then my partner pointed out first, because she's cleverer than I am, watch how behavior is reinforced when she dresses pretty. And then we watched it. Every time she put on a dress, every time she put on a bow, everybody in her space would come and say, oh, how beautiful, how nice, how lovely you look. You know what I mean? The appreciation she got when she dressed like a little girl far outstripped the appreciation she would dress if she was in a pair of t-shirts and shorts. And you saw this development and this reinforcement, right? But enough science exists to show that this is not the case. Pink is not a color for a boy, and blue is not, pink is not a color for a girl, and blue is not a color for a boy. There's enough science out there that you have this now. And then you go to the 6-year-olds, and again you see a shift in terms of, for example, what kinds of stuff now. So the dolls and the tea sets and everything starts here on this side.
Yeah.
And then on the other side you have the guns and the cars, and you have that starts on that side. And if you take a look at the designs on the t-shirts too, you have the Ben 10s, and you have this superhero vibe here, and you have a princess vibe here, right? So this is coming now. And then when you get to 12, you have some families who don't even buy bicycles for their daughters, because then those issues around, or the misconceptions around virginity, for example, still prevail. You think, how could it? But they still prevail, right? To the point where bicycles aren't thought of as appropriate for a 12-year-old girl. And then when you go to 18, basically the key messages there would be protect yourself, protect yourself, protect yourself, because you are living within an asking for it culture, to the girl. And to the boy, make sure that you make enough money to provide for your family. If you distill.
Okay.
If you distill, right? Those are the key messages that go through. So that is the ecosystem that we help our participants in the workshop identify before we begin to try and dismantle that.
Right.
And another thing that we do then group-wise is, okay, what are masculine qualities and what are feminine qualities? And every quality written down ultimately is a human quality. There is nothing unique, masculine or feminine. You are, I mean, think of one. Think of one and tell me that it can't apply to a man. Think of one and tell me that it can't apply to a woman, right?
Yeah.
If it's not biological, if it's not related to genitalia, think of one, right? So we need to reframe our approach. in terms of what we do with our children. I think there are wheels that have been invented, so we're good. Mm-hmm. There's enough science out there. Mm-hmm. There's programs being implemented in Sri Lanka that strangely don't continue. But there have been programs that have been very successfully implemented in Sri Lanka on social emotional learning,
right,
on giving the primacy for core competencies like respect, what respect means, how to value, what consent means, what it means to be kind,
yeah,
what it means to be mindful. So it's a wonderful move. I don't know if you've noticed. It's a wonderful move that now mindfulness is something that is being spoken about, that the current Minister of Education is saying we're having these mindfulness sessions in schools and the rest of it. I think that's movement in the right direction, but we need to make sure that that's not some tokenistic effort that doesn't put in the time that is required. So the knowledge is out there, things can be done, but we seem to have other priorities.
Yeah, yeah. Let's also speak a bit about the domino effect that is had on a society that shuns away from having open, transparent conversations which are age appropriate on sexual and reproductive health and sexual and reproductive rights.
I'm going to tell your viewers about menstruation, because that's what I open with teachers. So we go and work with health science teachers on how to deliver the existing curricula, which is in the grade 7, grade 8 and grade 9 book, and if it's an O-level optional subject, up to grade 11. Okay? So we unpack those books for them and give them tools and little activities that they can do in the classroom to make sure that that is cognized by the kids understand.
Right.
Okay, and to try and counter the shame and the kind of embarrassment of the teacher also in teaching that. So we try and take away the shame and the fear of that.
Yeah.
Now, our first step in that, every workshop that we conduct, is someone describe to me menstruation. Because menstruation is a very good entry point for us, because it really also speaks to the myths and misconceptions that exist, like the Kili Sankalpa, for example, that you are unclean, and that religious places do not allow women who are menstruating, and that those conversations, it allows us to have conversations.
Yeah.
I asked the teacher there, one of the teachers there, can you please tell me about the menstrual cycle as the starting point? And there were about, let's say, 15 teachers there, health and physical education teachers in the space. And she goes up to the board and she draws the internal reproductive anatomy very clearly. So the egg comes out, wound, blood flows through the fallopian tube, through the womb and out the vagina. Now I was stunned. I didn't want to show it. And I asked the others, I said, would someone else like to also tell me, what do you think of this description? And they said, no, it's not accurate. I think it's like this. And then we had discussions around the endometrium and all the rest of it. But now what happened here? What happened here? Why did this lady in her 40s very confidently stand up and describe this as if it was fact? What happened? So then we had to sit with her. I had to sit with her and try to understand what had taken place here. So this was a story that had been told to her once upon a time, to explain to her what menstruation is. But she's a health science teacher. And in the health science book, there's a lesson on menstruation. So why hasn't she read her health science book? And why hasn't she read her health science teacher guide? Because if you have done this lesson in class even once, and she has been teaching for 13 years, then she would have learnt that what she was told is not scientifically accurate. Right? Then you would also have the opportunity to teach in that menstruation lesson about the fact that Kili Sankalpa Pamanai, that it is only a concept, that it is not true that menstrual blood is unclean. So that's all there in the textbook.
Right.
Right? So what we have is a situation where we need to focus on making sure we give our teachers, for example, I think it is the responsibility of the National Institute of Education to really take the responsibility to make sure that our teachers of health and physical education have the skills to teach that in the classroom. How many students continue to say, and it was probably true during our time, continue to say that the teachers avoid those subjects, that they don't talk about reproduction, that they don't talk about sex, that they don't talk about pregnancy, that they don't talk about HIV, that they skip those lessons. This is not coming for the exam, this is not coming for the term test, we'll do that next week, next week never comes, right? So surely the state, and here I specifically mean the National Institute of Education, it is incumbent upon them to make sure that their curriculum is taught. Imagine if a maths teacher decides to skip teaching part of that syllabus. Imagine if a science teacher says, no, this is not appropriate for you to know, because health teachers have told me this is not appropriate for my grade 7 students to know. What? It says in the teacher guide, begin the conversation around masturbation. So as to not vilify masturbation.
Right.
You know what I mean? Begin that conversation. There is, in the current health and physical education text, these conversations to be had. But teachers take the call. It is up to the teacher's judgment call across the country whether they teach this in the classroom or not, or at best avoid it.
Right.
Okay? But why are we allowing for that?
Yeah.
You have got experts to sit down and write this curriculum for you, which improves every review. I have to say it improves every review. And it has a long way to go, but it is going.
Right.
Right? And you have wonderful people working on it. I know some of them. So why aren't we making sure it's taught in the classroom? Right? So in the same way, we have done programs. Sri Lanka has done programs on social emotional learning that can be replicated.
Okay.
And must be replicated.
Comprehensive sexuality education is not on the priority list of any government. Why?
I don't know. I mean, I can give you some kind of conjecture. But I don't know. I just think it makes sense if it is.
Why I asked you that question was because we see several generations of children, now adults, without having had sex ed. And we see equally also a society where there are hundreds of abortions taking place on a daily basis.
800 a day, depending on the research you read.
Yeah. And the reportage.
Yeah.
Gender-based violence being so normalized across the board. Suicides, mental health issues, so much of hurt, anger, suffering that young adults go through.
It's ridiculous.
Nobody cares.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that our education has not responded. It's ridiculous.
Because there's a direct parallel between teaching your kids about sex, teaching your kids about reproductive health and rights, and all of these social issues.
I'd like to go further. I think what we need to take a look at is what are the different things our kids need to learn. And if you want an umbrella term, I actually would go further than comprehensive sexuality education to, let's call it relationship education.
Okay.
Because it's more than just about penises and vaginas and unintended pregnancies. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Because a sexual relationship is about how we treat each other, right? It comes down to that fundamentally. It is what does pleasure mean to a couple, right? That's what it comes down to. Fundamentally, it comes down to that.
And dignity, kindness, respect.
Empathy, right? Valuing each other, consent above all, right?
Yeah.
Right? So above all, consent. So it boggles my mind for all the reasons that you outlined, including what I'm going to read from now. I brought some statistics. I just wanted to, in case we went here. These are statistics from the NCPA, the National Child Protection Authority, right? Now, I'm going to tell you a little story about child protection education, because I think before we get to sexual and reproductive health education and we have that discussion around rights, even before we go to social emotional learning and try and put that in place, I think our first point of entry must be child protection education. It must be to equip our children with the skills that they need to prevent child sexual abuse, child abuse.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that is a very non-controversial approach. No one wants our children to be sexually abused or abused in any way. So now I'm going to read to you some statistics. So just a few: 123 rapes, 246 grave sexual abuse. What is the difference? Rape definitions in Sri Lanka mean penile vaginal penetration only. Okay, so any other kind of penetration and other kind of sexual abuse comes under grave sexual abuse. So 246. So that is 369 kids from last. So that's one a day, Vage, if you want. Okay. There. Then incest, 377 cases altogether now. Add some sexual exploitation, add some trafficking, add some sexual harassment. Now we are going into the thousands. Right? Child protection education, a pilot was done by the Canadian Red Cross, the Ministry of Education. It involved the University of Peradeniya, and they did this intervention over a 10-year period, and I would encourage viewers to go and Google Canadian Red Cross Child Protection Sri Lanka, and a report comes up. And I would encourage you to go and read that report, just to give you an idea and give you some insight into how things happen. Now, when you read that report, you see that that program, which was evaluated very closely, was deemed very successful. In fact, the only attitude that they seem to have struggled to change over that 10-year period with parents who were part of that intervention was that parents still thought that it was okay for teachers to hit their kids in schools. Right? So they couldn't change that, but most else there had been positive trajectory in terms of attitude. Okay? Now the parents who responded to that, and it was done in all 25 districts, the parents who responded to that responded positively. We love this program. Okay, it was a very scientifically designed program. It involved an elephant which can be used by the child to identify the areas of good touch, bad touch, etc. Okay. It had a very simple methodology like a no-go tell. So say no, go away, and tell a trusted adult. How do we identify trusted adults? The full works. Right? The full works. This was done properly. This was done right. And it showed that every single stakeholder, including the master trainers, the teachers, the parents, the principals, read the report, everyone glowing. Okay? Then, alarm bell. But do we have funding to continue this? Alarm bell. Right? National Child Protection Authority is part of this also. Ministry of Education, I said that. Do we have funding to continue this? Teacher is saying now in the feedback. And we don't have time to do this now, we have a syllabus to finish. Right? This is more of an extracurricular. Read the report. Alarm bell. Now, as a result of that, where is that program? Why isn't that program there? Why don't our children have access to this information? We work in the Ibagamur division with kids who are groomed to the point of gang rape. Right? So, what are we doing? How is this controversial? Why have we not got child protection education in schools? I'd like an answer from the National Child Protection Authority. The Ministry of Education keeps changing, right? It is down to the National Institute of Education. That is our apex body here. The people who sit down and write these textbooks. Why have you not put child protection education? Why are you not using the National Child Protection Authority's approach? Why are you not using their leaflets? Why are you not using their material? Why don't you have people from NCPA writing your lessons? You know what I mean here?
Yeah.
So it's a no-brainer. And yet, it appears not to be one of our priorities. And in the same way, as you rightly pointed out, why aren't we teaching our kids in an age-appropriate manner what relationships mean, what consent means? Of course, our kids need to know what consent means. Look at public transport. Women and girls, they find themselves at a loss on public transport. The research is clear.
Yeah.
UNFPA research, Oxfam Sri Lanka research, it's very clear. They did a campaign in 2009, the UNFPA, the Colombo Municipal Council, Ministry of Women, Ministry of Transport. They did a campaign in 2019. But ask a woman today whether that campaign helped. Ask a woman today if she knew of that campaign. I'm not rubbishing the campaign, but a campaign has a limited hit. What we need is having those conversations in schools. What it means to respect another girl or a boy. You know, what are these words we use like badua and kella? What are those words? How can we introduce a girl to our friends and say, "Me machan mage badua," or "Wage kella ve nadda?" I mean, when we reduce, we are reducing people. No, we are reducing people.
Yeah.
We are reducing. So when parents come to me and they show me pictures of their daughters, which are essentially body parts, and they're in tears because they can't understand why. Part of me says, well, we are to blame as a society because we have reduced the woman to body parts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, and for me, I have no problem in terms of people, if they want to consensually exchange whatever they want to do online, that is, if they do it consensually and are of age, that is part of their sexual expression. I have no problem with that. But know that there are consequences.
Yeah.
Know that there is blackmail, know that there are websites, know that people are profiting off these images and these videos. So know that if you make this, it might end up somewhere. So you should know those things. But ultimately, let's come back. So these parents, I mean, we have done it.
Yeah.
I ask any forum, any training program, hands up those who have never called a girl a badu or a kella. Once a guy put his hand up and said, I haven't. And then I said, have you used an equivalent? He said, yes. I said, in what language? He said, in Tamil. So I said, then okay, you have too, right? Another boy in a Lama Samaj raised his hand. This was kids 10 to 14 in Beruala. And I asked this question, Kavadavat Baduwa Kayala Kela Nattang Ata Ussanna. And there were about 20 kids, 10 to 14. One kid raised his hand and he said, "Eh, mokadda sir, mang eka danne naha. I don't know what that is." And then, classic really, the kids said, "Oi, eka danne nadda oi? Wadak naha oi? Tamuse pirimiyadda oi?" That was the right. So this idea of masculinity again, is it a rite of passage to get on a bus and sexually molest a woman or a girl? It's those, that's the vibe I'm getting when I have conversations with perpetrators. That it's something that needs to be done. You know what I mean? So a friend of mine did a wonderful piece of research, which is yet to be published, but I can share early finding, where she has conversations with people of diverse sexual orientation about harassment in public spaces. And then it emerges that one group that she talked to, there were chaps there who said, we also harass girls. Because that's what boys do. So they are not heterosexual, but they harass a girl a way a heterosexual would in order to say that that is what a masculine person does. And in order to say that is part of my masculinity, which we thought was incredibly interesting in terms of the reach of, okay, what does it mean to be masculine and what does it mean to be masculine within this asking for it culture?
Right.
Where the woman is always to blame.
Right.
Even if she is comatose and climbed upon, she is somehow still to blame for being in that position at that time.
How does internalized misogyny in women feed into this culture?
Well, you can't have patriarchy without all of us sort of jollying it along.
Yeah.
We're all jollying it along.
Yeah.
We can't say the patriarchal construct is sustained only by toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
That's not the case at all. And also, we go along with it because sometimes not for any sort of toxic purpose, because we feel that that is the way it is.
Right. So we don't question the status quo.
This is natural. It's the natural world is this. Look at the other apes. Look at the chimpanzees, for example. Look at how they behave. We are also an ape. Because now we are a species that continues to evolve, right? So we evolve because we know more and we see what the greater good is, and that is, if you take a look at the evolution of humanity, if you take a look at the evolution of our laws are always evolving. I mean, the Human Rights Declaration is from 1948. I mean, that's how recent it is, right? So we are evolving in terms of how we treat each other.
Yeah.
And the equality and equity and justice that we want, those have become ideals as of late, right? It's not, they were not ideals 100 years ago necessarily.
And we have the power of reasoning also.
Yeah, right? But if we have all this now,
Yeah.
then why do we want to humiliate and degrade another person? What is it about us that wants to humiliate and degrade and put down and stigmatize and discriminate? What is it? What is the learning in us that makes us do that? You know, despite these conversations that they keep having with us about how old and great we are as a civilization, I think we are. I think if you take a look at, I think it was Maldridge, who was the author, again you can Google this, talked about ancient kings who had rules in place on child protection. So this, you know what I mean, Sri Lankan kings, where they saw the value of the child.
Right.
And they saw the value of that family unit, and they saw the value of the communication and the relationship that is needed between parent and child.
Right.
Right? Because the best prevention while we wait for the schools is for the parent to talk to the child and have a very open sort of open lines of communication while we wait for education reform.
Yeah.
Because your kid needs you in the spaces they navigate today, online and off. Your kid needs you.
Why are we as a society so ashamed to talk about sexual and reproductive rights, health, sex? Why? How does shame feature in this conversation?
So if you take a look at, for example, where do our values come from, how are our values built, you will see that there are some transcendent belief systems, if you like, religions, if you like, that really influence our social contracts. And some of those belief systems, if we refer to menstruation, for example, sometimes pick stuff up as they go. Because it always amuses me that women aren't allowed into sacred Buddhist spaces, because it was women who brought the two greatest relics of the Buddhist faith to Sri Lanka, Sangamitta and Hemamala. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So our norms and mores how have they been designed? Who designed them? Where do they come from? So I think it goes back, right?
Yeah.
So those ideas, they change. Now, if you take a look at really early, and this is something I always point to, really early ideas of divinity were very feminine. You had Mother Earth. You had totems which were very sort of fecund, if you like, with large breasts and voluptuous buttocks, and you know what I mean, sort of symbols of fertility, and those were the earliest things we had. I mean, there's even a lovely mother goddess artifact at the Anuradhapura Archaeological Museum, which was found in Kilinochchi, which could date from BCE, right? So it's fascinating. It's fascinating. There's a lot of stuff even in Sri Lanka. So then, where the feminine somehow then became inferior to the man, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because menstrual blood at one point was the life force of this earth, and it was venerated as such. But now it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the more human conversations we can have and move beyond this binary to celebrating each other, I think the better.
Yeah, absolutely. The intersectionality between law and politics. If we are to have policies that are inclusive, we need policymakers who have the political will to bring forth these policies and ensure the implementation in a holistic manner where all stakeholders are consulted. How far away are we from achieving this as a society?
I think if we continue to close our eyes to the reality of what our young people and our children are going through, then this might not be up the pecking order for our lawmakers. So I really feel that there needs to be a groundswell of parental intention here.
Okay.
I feel that parents are pivotal right now in making sure that they hold the school primarily responsible for teaching the established curriculums, that they start asking for child protection education.
Okay.
Right? Why do our children not have child protection education? So, the system as it exists, while the NIE doesn't have a child protection curricula, which they should, and that should be the trajectory, certain NCPA officers, if you like, are part of the district Lekam Karyala setup, right? And then they get to go in and conduct sessions on child protection where possible. However, you can imagine it depends on the gumption and intention and attitude of the officer individually. It comes down to that. It comes down to his drive. It also comes down to the principle of the school to allow for that to happen, because there is a syllabus to finish and all his teachers are under pressure to do that. Right? So that is why it needs to be part of a syllabus. So you have this ecosystem that already exists though. And our parents must start having these conversations with teachers, start having these conversations wherever they are, because then it becomes a political need. Now, in the old days, depending on the system, I mean, do you know who your parliamentarian is? Can you let him know that this is part of your thinking right now? You know, if you are working, if you are connected in a political space, then why not make people aware that this is something that parents really want? Why not actually listen to parents? Because right now the fear is, oh, if we try to do this, everybody is going to get upset that we're trying to teach kids to have sex. We are not trying to teach kids to have sex. We are trying to teach kids how to respect each other.
Yeah.
We are trying to teach kids how to value themselves. We're trying to focus on self-esteem. We're trying to help children be more mindful, like the minister is trying to do right now. Right? That is what we're trying to do. Sex within a relationship is only one element of that relationship. And that, the information for that already exists in the curricula also. Okay? So let's give our teachers the skill sets they need to do that, and let's let the schools, let the school bodies, the parents, the school is a wonderful ecosystem. You have the parent there, you have the student there, you have the teacher there. It's a wonderful ecosystem to work with. So I think the National Institute of Education should definitely take the leadership in this, and if not consult them, consult with your parents and see if this is wanted or not. Why don't you do that as a start?
Right.
If you want to do it again. But you had this wonderful intervention that the government was a part of. You have all the evidence that you need that this works. So why not just, without reinventing the wheel, dust this project off that you so successfully implemented,
Right.
and put it across the country.
Education is just one important aspect in teaching kids, young adults, and adults themselves of their rights and responsibilities. We also have this role of the criminal justice system, which continuously needs to update itself, be strengthened. At present, we have laws which are violative of the rights of certain individuals and persons. According to the Constitution of Sri Lanka, all persons are equal.
Article 12.
Absolutely. However, there are laws which need to be urgently repealed. However, that's not happening. How do we ensure that we protect the rights of ourselves, but also of those whose rights are being violated on a daily basis?
I think the lawmakers have potentially, what you believe in the news, I think a private member bill was put up last year. If the lawmakers listen to the Sri Lanka College of Psychiatry, who declassified diverse sexual orientation and gender identity as a mental illness in 2018, they finally came out and said it officially.
Right.
Okay, in 2018. The World Health Organization said it in 1992. The American Psychiatric Association said it in 72.
Wow.
Right? So that's your timeline on that. But we've said it now. We have the science. We have the evidence to show that these laws do not help anyone. You love whom you love. You want to be with whom you want to be with. And as long as consent is in play, then that's fine. Everyone knows that now. We reflect that really in our society. We reflect that really. We reflect it even in the village. I can see it. It's palpable. However, you then have this attempt, if you like, to classify it as unnatural, right? So then unnatural means unnatural by whose standard? Because often the trope is only human beings are gay. Just use Google because it's there. Just use it and see if that is in any way true, whether the human being is the only gay mammal out there. Just see if that is a true statement. Okay, number one. Number two, within this heteronormative patriarchal construct, fundamentally, we are always looking for the other. Right? We are always on the hunt for the other. Sri Lankans are on the hunt for the other. Who is the other? Right? So we have always had this other to discriminate and stigmatize.
Right.
So when we are fed with this misinformation, then that is the case. I mean, this law has no place at all. And the other one is the conflation of, it happens all the time, the conflation of, for example, pedophilia with homosexuality. If you are gay, somehow you are a predator of little boys. There is no connection. And if you want to really talk about pedophilia, again, You can put in a, you can ask for the, you can go to the RTI or the police.lk website and put in a request. Just ask for the data on pedophiles and see the sexual orientation. Just do that and see what you come up with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So these tropes, I mean, just let's follow the science. Let's follow our scientists. There are ways forward. There are pioneers here who are making wonderful changes. You have organizations like the National Transgender Trust. You have Equal Ground. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Equity coming up. You have all these wonderful organizations, Venasa, which is another trans network. Wonderful organizations who are really fighting for the rights of people on the ground to be treated as whom? A Sri Lankan citizen. A Sri Lankan citizen.
Yeah.
To have the rights that any other Sri Lankan citizen has.
My final question to you, have you considered conducting workshops for the parliamentarians?
Someone has to invite.
Okay.
Yeah, can't just turn up at the parliament and knock on the door and say, I'm here for a workshop. Someone has to invite. No one has invited us.
But you're open to it?
I'm open, but I think, see, there are parliamentary select committees. These are not, everything that I've discussed here with you today is by no means something that people in parliament have not heard of before. This is not the, I mean, we are having this conversation, but there are organizations like Equal Ground, like Family Planning Association, who have been fighting, advocating for, I know, for over a decade and probably longer, right? So, who's listening is the point.
Yeah.
So, where is it on the priority list is the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
No? Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Hans Willy Moria from the Grassrooted Trust, advocate in sexual and reproductive health and education. Thank you so much for being a part of the People's Platform. We'll see you again on a Monday with the Sinhala edition of the People's Platform. Have a safe weekend. Good night.